What's up, guys? It is Will here, and thank you for joining us for the very first episode. This is the new channel called Everything The Last of Us, and this is our show called Everything The Last of Us. We're going to post this on YouTube. We'll see if it's going to be posted other places in the near future, maybe Spotify, maybe Google. What Google Store? I forget. Amazon? I don't know. There's so many places you can listen to a podcast nowadays. But I know for a fact you can listen to it on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. So I'm going to be looking at that pretty soon. But for now, find us on Everything The Last of Us YouTube channel. We're going to recap every single episode of The Last of Us from season 1 of the HBO show. And also, we're going to talk about, of course, other things Last of Us related merchandise. We're going to talk about the games. We're going to talk about everything in between for Last of Us, Easter eggs even. But today, we're here to recap episode 1 of HBO's The Last of Us. And guys, please help me welcome our esteemed guest, Mr. Optical 20, who you may know from collecting, but also one of the biggest Last of Us fans out there, along with myself. So I knew he was the first person I needed to bring in to discuss The Last of Us, because he and I have talked about this extensively before the show ever even aired. Optical, how you doing, man? How excited are you for this Last of Us recap?
I was texting. Oh, not texting. I was
you were messaging me the whole time.
Let's do this, because my dopamine is all hyped up.
Dude.
And I was just like, let's do this. But I know it was like late, but man, I'm happy to talk about this. I can talk about this all day. I don't even need Monday to Saturday anymore.
Nope.
Just go straight to Sunday. That would be great.
Dude, and Optical, that intro, that Last of Us intro, bro. HBO kills intros, no doubt about it. They absolutely slay intros. This was the best one. Better than Game of Thrones. And I'm willing to throw that out right now.
Yes.
Because I think Optical, this was the best one. So, yeah, man. And Optical, I know you and I have both played The Last of Us 1 and 2. I'm not the biggest Last of Us 2 fan. I think, are you a fan of Last of Us 2?
I like it in terms of a game, a standalone game. But if we factor in Last of Us 1,
right,
you can kind of say that I'm going to ruin the experience for me. But you know.
and you know, I get it. This is going to be, I guess, a divisive fandom, just because you got a lot of people who love Last of Us 2 and a lot of people who don't. I'm a big Last of Us 1 fan. I have a tattoo. I have some elements from Last of Us 2 on my arm, though, so there are things I like about it, but it's just not, I really don't like the game that much. But first one, best game ever made. I think I've played it Optical 20 plus times through, so I'm obsessed. So that said, should be pretty exciting. But nonetheless, guys, thank you so much for joining us. Let's start with our first topic of the evening or the morning, depending upon when you're listening to this. The Last of Us HBO episode 1, so Optical. I want to start by sort of just going over our general overview of what the episode was and how happy we were with it. So the question I have, I think, that I want to start with is, are we happy with episode 1 of HBO's The Last of Us? Are we happy with it as an adaptation? Are we happy with it just in general as a show? So Optical, what do you think? I mean, how are you feeling watching this episode?
All right. Full disclosure, we are super fans, right? So we're probably looking at this with rose-colored glasses, but we're also being a little bit more technical here. Because if you guys know us, remember, we don't read comic books, me and Will. So whenever we hear this comparison, it's like, oh, it's not like in the comics, we kind of laugh. It's like, well, it's a movie, you know, kind of like, yeah, it's not always adapted for comic books. So this is the first time, I would say, in my life that I'm basing up a TV show or a movie to an original adaptation that I was first in love with. Right, because I'm more of a consumer of the movies or the TV show. That was my first introduction to these guys, like Captain America, Marvel. So this is the first time I can compare it. So now I can feel, I would say, the love or the hate of these comic book fans who was like, well, this is not like in the comics. And I'll be like, well, it's a movie. Now
we know.
That's not like in the game. Well, it's a TV show. But to answer the question, are we happy with episode 1? Keep in mind, I'm playing the game. This is how crazy I am. I'm playing the game the same pace as the TV show. So when they stop there, I stopped where they stopped. So I just want to, it's fresh. Everything's fresh to me. Am I happy? Absolutely happy. Now, it's not carbon copy like the game.
Nope.
It's not. And it shouldn't be. I don't think it needs to be. But they showed some elements of Sarah that we didn't see on the TV show. I mean, on the game.
Yep, 100%.
Sarah is, I would say, they gave more depth to Sarah, you know, kind of like it. And the way we were introduced to the clickers, they're not clickers yet, right? They're just zombies at this point.
Not yet. I mean, there will be some in episode 2. Yeah.
Okay. So, but the neighbor is
right.
Not yet. Right. Okay.
Dude, so that was crazy though. She had like tentacles, like tendrils coming out of her mouth. Like that was a little bit different than what we'd seen in the game.
Yeah, I think they emphasized because it's fungus, right?
Yeah, fungus. Yeah,
fungus like coming out of her mouth. Maybe they just kind of like, hey, this is the beginning stage. So we never saw that. Right. All we saw them was like clickers, like the fungus is now like eating their face or whatever. But we saw more Sarah, which is I'm happy about because unlike the game, and this is where it gets different. We got attached to Sarah by playing as her. Well,
Right.
as in the TV show, you're not playing as her, so you can't just kill her. Like, all right, and she died, so whatever. But it gave depth. Like I look at it in a lens of like, oh man, now you got to care for her. So for anyone who hasn't seen Last of Us, this is for them. They need to care about Sarah first and then get their hearts broken. Because that's what happened to us when we were playing the game the very first time. It's like, oh, this is Joel's daughter. I'm gonna look around for some notes and whatnot. And when they did that, and this just the entire episode 1 is full of moments where like, well, that's not like in the game. But honestly, I wasn't upset about it.
No, me
I
either,
was
dude.
not upset with anything that's not in
Not
the
at all.
game. So very happy, more than satisfied. And this is coming from us. I would say that you can call diehard fans.
Oh,
You
yeah.
got a tattoo. I mean, we buy anything Last of Us. I'll buy a bedsheet of Last of Us.
I'll buy a comforter. I'll buy a coffee cup. I'll buy anything. Yeah, but Optical, I'm with you, man. So my thoughts on this episode were very positive because I knew coming into this, I was like, you know what? Having Craig Mazin attached to this, and, again, with Neil Druckmann, I still respect the guy. And, despite what he did with Last of Us 2, which, again, I'm not a fan of, but nonetheless, I was happy that he was attached to this because I was like, okay, we have someone who has a voice who really understands the first game. I was a little bit nervous, like maybe he would change some things. Maybe he was anti-Joel. I wasn't sure how he would be, right? But nonetheless, Craig Mazin comes in, the creator of Chernobyl, the director of Chernobyl. Dude, amazing. Knocked it out of the park. This first episode, I feel like, is everything I wanted it to be. It really, it pays homage to the game and also expands on it in certain ways. One of the things I had messaged you, Optical, when the episode was airing was I really liked how they were humanizing Sarah. I really like, because in the game, Optical, for the people who are uninitiated with the game, or unfamiliar with it, in the game, you don't really get to know Sarah that much. You basically get to see her interact with Joel, give him the watch, just like in the show, but you don't really get to see her go to school and go get the watch and do this and that. You really kind of got to connect with her for the first maybe 20 minutes of the episode, and I was like, man, I'm getting to know Sarah, I'm feeling for her, and then you get the gut punch. And it actually punches you that much more. I kind of like that. I'm actually looking back at this. I'm like, I'm surprised Naughty Dog didn't do that in the game. Like, give Sarah maybe like 30 minutes to an hour or something where you kind of explore with her, play as Joel and whatever, and you do something, and then she gets killed. Right. And by the way, there are spoilers in this episode. So if you have not seen the episode, please turn back. But I will say, and then she gets killed. Overall, Optical, I think that this episode is just effective in so many ways. The outbreak scene, fucking nailed it. Nailed it. That outbreak scene, that's exactly like how it is in the game. There's not even a plane crash in the game. They basically took a plane crash instead of the car crash. In the game, there's a car that crashes into the gas station and it explodes. In this one, there's a plane that crashes and it explodes. So it's even taking it to the next level. I still, it's hard to top the game with anything because the game is perfection, in my opinion, the first one. So, but at this episode, Optical, it deviates in certain ways. I really liked, we'll talk about this further, I really liked what they did with the castings, with the characters. I thought everyone was pretty good. They basically, they did a speed run through certain things. Like in the game, when you track down Robert and you're doing that for a couple hours, that's he dies like in the first 5 minutes. So he does that pretty quickly. But the visuals, Optical, which we'll talk about too, the visuals are incredible. The performances were incredible. The music is great because it's all original from Gustavo Santaolalla, the composer of the game. So it's great. And I honestly, 97% is what this show deserves. I think they absolutely nailed it. Maybe there's a couple things here and there that I was like Sarah's death scene, really, really liked it. I kind of missed the impact of having the music because in the game, the music, and it was like this sad sort of like violin type thing. Yeah. And it was real heart wrenching. And then with Sarah's death, also one little nitpick I'll have, at one point they kind of cut the audio and make it silent. Like, in those moments, you really see Joel sort of like cry out in agony in the game. And I feel like I kind of missed that slight little thing. But overall, I think they executed the scene pretty well. And the first episode, Optical, I would give it like a 9.5. I really, really loved it. What do you think?
Yeah, I totally agree with you, especially with Sarah's death as well. Because
right.
the thing with Sarah's death, I think that's why it hit us so hard, is because we tried so hard, first time playing the game, to save her. Because we were controlling Joel, carrying her, traversing to this, dying maybe a couple of times because you don't know where to go. You don't know that alley. So, and then you're finally in the safe zone. You feel like you're safe. And then you get the rug pull out of you. And you'd be like, what the fuck just happened? Like in the game, this is I guess, the problem when you're not playing the game because you're just watching it. So, and luckily I had this watching, and I forced my wife to do this because I want to see her perspective into it. Because obviously I'm gonna be biased to it, right? So I
Right,
want to
right.
see her reaction, and we'll talk about that later on. I was just like, is this as impactful to her as it is to me when I was first playing the game? Because that's what it all comes down to. And I agree that because they made this TV show for the non-gamers too. Like
Yep,
not
it's for
just for
both.
gamers, it's for both. And I want this to, even though I play the game, I want this to appeal to everyone, to share this experience to non-gamers. I was like, guys, they just made this masterpiece of a game, so I want you to experience it. And I agree, the impact is not as much as in the game, and I get it, but I wish they would have gave Joel or Pedro a little bit more time to grieve, because
Mm,
that he's such a good actor.
he is.
Dude, like give him at least a minute to cry. Like make us feel the hurt of a father that just lost it. And then one thing too is like after that, like you said, the music was gone. And I was used to the game. After that, you get the music and then the intro. So I wish the intro was not the beginning. I wish the beginning was like the
That's a
movie.
really good point, actually. What if they rolled that intro after Sarah died? Yeah,
Right. After
just like in the
Saturday.
game.
Right. So I wish that the intro was the news conference, like the news when there was a guy talking. It gave me the Batman feel, like the
Hmm.
Batman, Robert Pattinson,
Yeah,
sitting in 1968. I wish that was the case. 20 years later, Joel, right after Sarah died, boom, intro. That feels like, and then the music hits of Gustavo. It's like, man, I think about just giving me chills because I just literally played the game before watching that show. So,
right,
ooh.
right. Absolutely, man. But I think we're both really happy with it. And Optical, I want to move on to sort of our next topic here, talking about casting and performances. So, for those of us that have played the game, for those who have not, I highly recommend you do get it on PS5, the remake, or even get the PS4 version if you can. That's also a fantastic version, the remastered version. But I want to pull up something Optical about the cast here because I know that I took a screenshot of what the HBO cast is, right? So we can see here we got a lot of great actors in the show race basically, and I feel like Craig Mazin and Neil Druckmann have done a really good job casting. And of course, the big two that you're going to see are Ashley Johnson and Troy Baker, who are actually in this show. Troy Baker ends up playing one of David's men, who you'll find later on in Winter, and you'll find Ashley Johnson, who I believe, as far as I'm aware, is going to be Ellie's mother, but we're going to find out. So one thing I do want to address, though, Optical, some of the more, for one, we got to address the casting of Pedro and Bella because I think they're both fantastic. As far as Tommy with Gabriel Luna, I loved him. I thought he was great, bro. And Anna Torv as Tess, I actually thought she was great. Like, I thought she was great. She's actually, I know her from, if you ever seen the show Optical Mindhunter, it's on Netflix. It's like they're catching serial killers and stuff like that. She's in that. She's amazing in it. She's just fantastic. And I think she's great as Tess. I also love Sarah, Nico Parker. I thought she was great. I really, really liked her. Every casting so far, Optical, I've really loved. But I mean, honestly, as much as a backlash as Bella Ramsey got, she was great. I thought she really fits Ellie perfectly from what we've seen thus far. And Pedro Pascal, dude, honestly, man, after seeing Pedro in one episode, I'm not sure you could have casted anyone better. Like, I think, honestly, I feel like he perfectly fits Joel. Like, I feel like he, again, he doesn't necessarily have to be white like Joel to be Joel. Like, I feel like he perfectly captures that essence of what Joel is, a rugged survivor that's damaged. So, Optical, what do you think about the performances and the castings? Are you pretty happy with what you've seen in one episode?
Dude, it's HBO. I always like Game of Thrones. I have no idea a single, actor in that before it began. All I know is Sean Beam, and they killed him right away.
Yeah, they did. I was like, no way.
Like, so I don't. This is for me at least. Like, if you guys knew who the actors were in Game of Thrones in season episode 1, then kudos to you. But at least for me, it was like, who are these guys? And normally that's how it is. Like nowadays, you don't need a big name to have a fantastic show like Stranger Things. We don't know who these guys are, like outside of a few actors here and there. But at least now we have at least for me, I know Gabriel Luna, Pedro Pascal, and Bella Ramsey. They're pretty famous by now.
Mm-hmm.
And we had a little bit of backlash because of the looks, not because of, I think, their acting skills, because we all know what Pedro brings to the table. I mean, he single-handedly made Wonder Woman 1984 watchable. Single-handedly.
Yeah, he did.
He did. And his back was hurt.
And his Oberyn, Optical. Oberyn Martell in Game of Thrones, he's fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, after doing 84, I'm surprised he didn't get a back brace because he just fucking carried that movie.
It's like Bane and Batman.
Yeah. But like you said, after watching it, Gabriel Luna, my God, is that look-wise? Sure, they're not perfect, because these guys are Texans, as American as you could get.
Right.
But the essence, the character put into them, I mean, I can't complain. Gabriel Luna is Tommy now. I
Yep.
don't care what anyone says. He's Tommy now. Pedro Pascal, like back then we were like, what's his name? Nicolau, Jamie Lannister.
Oh yeah, Nikolaj Coster-Waldau.
Nicola,
He would have been pretty great too, but
I mean, the guy is not no slouch in acting as well.
No, he isn't.
So the look wise, sure, he's better, suited as looking Joel as far as aesthetics is concerned. But Bella Ramsey too, man. She was the complete opposite of Nico Parker, which is Sarah.
Mm-hmm.
So it just fits into just Ellie. Even though I don't necessarily need them to look. It's nice if they're closer, but from what I've seen, from now on, I'm not even going to question it. Bella is Ellie, Pedro's Joel, Gabriel is Tommy. I don't care what they are. They could be blue for all I care. But for the way they embody the character, there's nothing more I can ask for.
They could be the Na'vi from Avatar, and we'd totally be fine at this point.
I'll be fine.
By the way, guys, if you hear children in the background, it's because Optical is taking care of his children solo today. So that's totally why that's happening in the background. So no, nothing crazy going on, I promise. But as far as casting and performances, Optical, yeah, I'm totally with you, man. I thought Bella Ramsey was great in the limited screen time she did have. This episode is really more about Joel, which is pretty much what happens in the game too. Ellie's not really introduced until like maybe a couple hours in, because it's really starting about Joel following his journey and then kind of going from there. So I would say that overall, it's kind of meant to be one of those situations where Joel was meant to be the lead of the show, and really that's what he is. And eventually it becomes a co-lead situation, but for now, Pedro is going to kind of take the lead to start off the show, and then Ellie comes in, and it's going to be sort of a handoff sort of thing. Ellie takes some stuff, Joel takes some stuff, and so forth. But really, if you've played the first game, the game is primarily about Joel. So it's one of those situations where, yeah, at the end of the day, Joel was really the lead here, and I feel like the performances really reflect that. So nonetheless, Optical, I feel like the performances are great. I'm excited to see Nick Offerman as Bill. I think we might see him as soon as next episode.
Yeah. Oh, if not, and I might add, the new update to PS5 and PS3 test was kind of hot-ish, right? Like just hot, like in PS4 or PS3. It's kind of young, slender and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Test the new version on PS5. She's kind of older. She looks like she's in her 40s, kind of beat up and all that stuff. And I think Anna just kind of encapsulated that. She got a black eye and all that stuff. So that looks pretty cool too.
Yeah, absolutely, bro. 100% Optical. I totally agree with you on that one. And I think it's one of those things where I just feel like Anna Torv was great as Tess. I feel like she captures the sort of, again, rugged personality of Tess and fits the mold of the character. So I'll say that overall casting and performance is very happy with what I've seen thus far. And Marlene, I'm glad to see Merle Dandridge come back as Marlene, who voice acted her and mocapped her in the game. I think she's great. I think she's great. I think she fits the role of Marlene, so I'm glad it was able to work out. Can't wait till we meet Henry and Sam in real time. That'll be fun.
God, for those who hasn't seen it, yeah. I don't know how I'm going to react to that, but let's see. I'm sure it'll be fine.
We're going to find out. So Optical, let's address something else here. Does it live up to the game's opening sequences? Because there is so much, I guess, that happens in the first hour and a half of the show, right? There's an outbreak. There is Sarah introduced and sort of humanized. There is Joel 20 years later with Tess. There's Robert. There's Ellie introduced. There's Marlene and the Fireflies talking about what their plans are. So Optical, I think this is one of those where the game, there's a lot to live up to with this show, because the game, this is by many people considered the best game ever made. That's what I would argue. I think it is the best game ever made personally, but I'm more of a story cinematic gamer anyway. So I don't, some people might say it's Mario. Some people might say it's, Super Smash Brothers. To me, I really like those cinematic story action adventure games. That's my big thing. So if I'm looking at something like The Last of Us, it perfected it. I feel like it's one of those situations. Yes, there were games that came before that were great, but this one is very hard to top. And because of that, the show has to be pretty damn good. That said, Optical, how do you feel about the show living up to the legacy of the game's opening sequences? Because I feel like it pretty well encapsulated. There's some deviations here and there, like with the old lady. She's not in the game. In the game originally, Optical, you remember Sarah wakes up and you're playing as Sarah, right? And you come downstairs, and then at one point, Joel is outside. You have no idea what he's doing. And Sarah comes downstairs and she comes running in, and then Joel comes running in, and he's like, well, yeah, the Coopers are sick or whatever. But you never really know what he was doing or where he was, right? So, but in the show rather, he was going to bail Tommy out of prison. So maybe that was a backstory the game just never got to. But it was an interesting sort of deviation to get Joel away, And then Sarah comes down and she's on her own for a little bit to experience the sort of horror of what's going on. And the lady and the next door neighbors, that's all new. But the outbreak sequences, Optical, I want to get your thoughts on those and just the opening sequences in general. How'd you feel about the first like 30 minutes to an hour of this episode?
And it's funny you mentioned that, because as you know, people who play the game, you're expecting something and then you get totally different. That's not I'm not saying that's a bad thing. That's not, you got to deviate at some point. But so far I am happy with the creative freedom that they took. It didn't feel offensive to me as a player that played the game, because I get it. I kind of wanted to see the 8 missed calls that, but it's not going to happen, because he literally took
He was in jail, yeah.
yeah, he took Tommy in jail. But I feel like that's something that they could have kept. You know what I mean? Because I like the idea of Tommy coming in to save them, kind of like, hey man, come on, there's this things going on. Then he rushes in, parks his car, come on, jump in. I kind of like that idea instead of him being bailed out. But again, I'm not offended with the route they took. It's fine. It's totally fine. But I just kind of like that it kind of gives you the sense of urgency. It's like 8 missed calls. What's happening? He's been calling you and all that stuff. And then, when Joel was backing out, it was like, and he's telling his neighbor in the game, stop, and he still, jumps in. I think that could have been kept. But again, I'm fine with the neighbor. I'm okay with the, I'm totally fine with the creative freedom that they took. But as far as, like living up to the legacy, the visuals is great for The Last of Us. And granting this came out PlayStation 3, 2013, the post-apocalyptic height. There's Walking Dead. So we have this vision of like ruins and the explosions when they're driving away. You can even see the hospital, the signs that says hospital and then freeway, because I've been paying attention to these things. They make a right turn. We're not going to take 71. So they make a right turn. They pulled over. There's zombies coming in. It's like, oh, back up. And they backed up. They looked behind the window and you see the explosions happening. It's like, dude, this is straight out of the game.
Yep.
Like literally straight out of the game, but live adaptation. When Tommy was navigating with his Jeep and Joel was just like, hurry up, or there's a family, they would be like, hey, bring us in. It was like, nope, we have a child too. And I was just like, God, it just gives you chills because you remember those moments.
Optical, did you catch that one little part? And it's funny, players of the game will absolutely have caught on to this. So when you play the game and like you said, you're driving with Tommy and you're going through the street and then the car comes out of nowhere and blindsides you and hits you, right?
Yeah.
There's the one moment Craig Mazin and Neil Druckmann fucking knew you were waiting for that. So basically when you're watching that, you can see there's like a slight moment where the camera pans and it's like a quick turn and there's no car coming. And you think they're going to get hit, but they don't. And they do it purposefully to trick you out because you're very much expecting for them to get blindsided like they do in the game. Yeah. However, that does not happen. They go through that area, then they start backing up and the plane crashes and it hits the car. Like debris hits the car. But it's a very interesting, they did that very purposefully to misdirect you. They were just kind of like, we're going to act like we're going to hit the car like that happens in the game and then we're going to deviate. That's basically what happened. But I'm glad Optical, they kept the aspect of Sarah's death. It plays out the exact same way. Yeah. Like she gets shot by a soldier. Tommy comes in, shoots the soldier, saves the day. It happens just like it does in the game. I think honestly, it couldn't have been executed any better. I think the performances all around were great. Dude, the outbreak scene is just wild. This is just wild. I feel like they captured what it's like in the game. It's just like that in the show. That moment where Pedro's taking Sarah and he runs through the alleyway basically. And then it just stops for a second. And then all the zombies just stop and then they all look up. And then you're just like, damn. It got real, bro. And this is not Walking Dead, which we're going to talk briefly about, but it just I don't know, it feels so high quality and so tense,
It's the perfect way to say it, because if you watch the first episodes of The Walking Dead, you're watching a TV show from something. It's like a smaller scale. This was a large scale. This feels like a big budgeted movie. And I think HBO is known for that. They have Game of Thrones, but you go there, it looks like the set was built specifically for that scene alone. You see the amount of people. It just feels like a large scale, just high budgeted TV show. And it feels good that they're doing our favorite game of justice, because to pull off what a 3D render is to an actual, live person event, man, I mean, kudos to them. This chase scene, and I was like, kind of like, this is me being the gamer. I was like, oh man, I wish I would have been a little bit longer. Yeah. But Tommy deviated, right? Like, I'll meet you. I'll go in the river. Because back then, Tommy was protecting you. It's like, all right, you traverse to this. Okay, I'm going to hold him off. There's a bunch of zombies. But this played as realistic as possible. Because if there's a bunch of zombies, Joel's dead because she's carrying Sarah.
Right.
So just one guy moved out. It's not too obscene because he kind of outran him in this, I don't know, like this pub. And then they went out and it's done. It would be like, all right, it's not as long as I thought it would be because in the game was longer, but
Right.
I'm totally happy with it because it's realistic,
Yep.
So
And that's why I feel like they've adapted it so well, where maybe video game movies and shows haven't done this as well. They adapted it for the screen perfectly, which is basically what I guess Marvel has done with their comics, right? And a lot of DC films too. They take the comics that are a little more outlandish and a little crazy and just kind of bring it down a little bit. And that's kind of to make it a little more realistic superhero like. And I feel like that's kind of what Last of Us did. They adapted it really well. But Optical, I want to ask you something. How do you feel about the pace of the show so far? Because we got about an hour 20 episode, the first episode, right? But and the game is like maybe 15, 20 hours for the game, right? So you kind of can't do that if you have 9 episodes, right? You can't really go through every single aspect. So you kind of got to speed run something, so to speak. How do you feel about the overall pace of the show? I feel like it moved pretty effectively, pretty quickly. Like it goes through what it needs to go through in the first episode. You get the outbreak, you get some humanizing of Sarah. You eventually go 20 years in the future where you got Ellie introduced and the Fireflies. The Robert stuff, honestly, man, I'm fine with that because at the end of the day, that is the weakest part of the game. Like the weakest part of the game is what I refer to as the tutorial period. That's basically where they try to introduce you to the controls, get you used to Joel and Tess, and you go track down Robert. It's kind of like, it's okay, right? It's good, but that's not really what makes it great and what, it's just a means to an end to get you started, right? So I'm kind of fine that they went through that pretty quickly, just to introduce Tess and then kind of move forward with it. So I would say Optical, I thought the pace was pretty effective. What do you think about it?
I think so too. Obviously, selfishly, I wanted to kind of mimic the game.
Right.
I thought it was faster, but because selfishly I want it to be like 20 episodes. You drag as much as you could. I'll consume all the Last of Us, but I get it. Like they're doing this as well for the non-gamers. So the Robert aspect, actually I like it more in the TV show than in the game. Because if you remember the game, there's a chase scene, you got Robert,
right,
Tess blasted him in the face. Here Robert got killed by fireflies.
Yep.
Which makes sense. And that is why you see a bunch of fireflies dead. You see Marlene, with the wound. Because in the game, you just see Marlene with a wound. She's walking. It was like, oh, where's Robert? And it was like, oh, right here. It's like, oh, I needed him alive. So in terms, the show was better than the game. And I won't say that often. And also in the game, they're looking for Robert because of the gun. Now here, they're looking for Robert because of a battery. So it also makes sense because he wants to go to his brother. So those make sense. And I was just like, all right, in that aspect, I like the show better than the game. So the pacing is quite fine. I'm surprised they got as far as they did because I was just like, oh, they're gonna drag this, kind of like Game of Thrones.
Yep.
But we are moving a lot faster than I thought we were. Actually, they went ahead of me more than me playing the game because I'm gonna stop where they stop. And I was like, oh, shoot, they're already with Tess. They're about to get out of, they already went out. And there's some aspects that I really like about the TV show. But as far as pacing, it's faster than I anticipated. And that's not a bad thing, especially for somebody like my wife who didn't play the game. She doesn't have time to listen to Robert, yap and it was like ask about his man and all that stuff. I like that they went straight to the point. Robert's not that important. Let's get him off here. Martinez, have this conversation and let's move on. But I love it.
I'm with you too. I think in a show, you have to move a little bit faster. Movie show, you have to move a little more briskly because you don't have time. You don't have 15 to 20 hours to do this. You only have maybe 10 hours to do it. So it's something where you really have to you'd have to trim some fat, so to speak. And like Robert is part of that fat that you have to trim. So I think at the end of the day, I'm fine with how they approached this and did it. But yeah, man, I think the pace was really good. I was engaged the whole episode. I'm willing to bet that many other people were as well, considering the Rotten Tomatoes score from the audience and the critics. It's been very positive, extremely positive. So at the end of the day, I just feel like, yeah, man, it's one of those where they nailed the pace of this. It keeps you engaged throughout. You get a lot of action. You get some character stuff in between. They even do some more general stuff, Optical, that one of them was a little bit too on the nose for me. And I'll talk about that. One of the first things that I want to mention is the scene where Pedro tosses the young girl, or I think it was a young girl, into the fire, basically.
Yep.
So that is meant to illustrate how hardened he's become as a survivor, where basically he does not give a shit anymore. He doesn't care about connection, whatever. He just wants to live, and he's lost all sort of humanism, right?
Yeah.
And humanity.
Thank you for bringing that up because I almost forgot that because it gives my wife or anyone what Fedra is about. because
Right.
she was asking, why do these guys want to get out? Why is there, aren't they glad that they're protected inside the gate? I was like, well, this is why.
Right. It's a
Kind of like,
dictatorship. Yeah.
right. It's like living through a martial law like myself is like, that's kind of like how martial law is. And it gave you an idea how, like you said, how hardened Joel is, what he. So
Right.
now he gave you an idea. Like even Robert was scared of Joel, and it wasn't conveyed clearly in the game. That
No.
just shows you that Joel is the right guy to bring Ellie out.
Right.
That
Because
kind
Joel
of
has a
shows how-
reputation. He has a
Right.
competence. Yeah.
Like if you haven't played the game, you'll be like, "Why this guy?" Like it's not like he doesn't look intimidating. Well, this is why. You see how he
Right.
tossed the kid with no, no
He literally threw Ellie into a wall too.
He's like, "There you go. It
Yeah,
is what it is."
Optical, the one other thing that I was going to mention actually, and I feel like this was a little bit too on the nose, and I don't think they needed to do this, where the game was more subtle and nuanced. The scene at the very end where Joel beats up the guard, and he's standing in front of Ellie with the flashlight on him and the soldier pointing the gun at him. That was obviously meant to reflect his first instinct to protect Ellie as it would be Sarah, right?
Yeah.
And I just feel like that, I like that, but it's a little too on the nose. It's kind of like you need the audience maybe to trust them to pick that up on their own, right? Because they can look at that and be like, okay, there's a similarity here. There's a consistency. And like you can pick that up by saying, like, okay, now Joel's in that situation again. How does he react to it? And I think we can kind of interpret that on our own without it being so in your face. Like they even do a flashback of Sarah, right, in that scene. And I'm like, I think the audience is smarter than that. I think they would be able to pick up on that. So maybe not, but I think that was maybe the one situation where the game is more nuanced and subtle, where it entrusts your intelligence to pick that up. It doesn't spoon feed you as much. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I get what you mean, but I'm, you know what, like you said, I'm not bothered by it.
No, it's okay.
Actually, I'm glad that it did because my wife was not paying attention when she watched it.
It's for her, yeah.
She's half on the phone, so I knew what that was, but I want her to. I don't know. It's just instinct. I want people to love what I love.
Right,
I'm not
me
shoving
too.
it in their throat, but like, especially she's my wife. She has no choice. So
There you go.
I told her, like, and she picked it up. I was like, oh, she kind of remembered. And I was just like, all right, cool. Thank God. Thank God they did that because otherwise she probably wouldn't have noticed because you're scrolling endlessly to your Facebook.
She's on the Insta. She's on the gram.
Yeah,
dude.
but she picked it up, and I'm glad. And I'm sure you watched towards the end. I didn't pick up Bella Ramsey's face, but it kind of like expresses that. But that's awesome. That's awesome. Those little details. When I love something this much, I you kind of pay attention to those.
Absolutely, bro. Absolutely. Well, Optical, I want to ask a follow-up here. How do we feel about the deviations in the storytelling? Because there weren't too many of them, to be honest. I feel like it was a pretty faithful adaptation. It was pretty much beat for beat in certain aspects. I mean, like we talked about, the part of maybe the 20 minutes with Sarah, that was brand new. The part with Robert being killed, that was different than how it was. But I liked that sort of deviation, Optical, because exactly like what you were talking about, collateral damage. That's what happens in The Last of Us and what happens in anything with martial law and real world, whatever. The Fireflies are rebels, right? They are trying to take down the government and the oppressive government. But at the end of the day, there's going to be collateral damage. There are going to be people that are caught in the crossfire of that. And that's exactly what happens. And they showed that pretty early. And I think that was a really effective point at illustrating that there aren't really good and bad guys here. This is one of those situations where it's just like, you know what? People get killed. And it's a very harsh world. And it's one of those situations where it's not necessarily like, they're good, they're bad. It's just like, you know what? We're trying to, overthrow the government because we don't like them and they're pretty oppressive. And we don't give a fuck who gets in our way. Some people care and some don't. So I like the deviations overall. Like I said, the one with Tommy being in jail, I actually like that. I actually thought that was a good way to get Joel from where he needed to be, right? Because again, you needed Joel out of the house to have Sarah on her own. Mm-hmm. So, and that's why they were like, okay, get him to go rescue Tommy, so to speak. And then Tommy and Joel are together. So you have them together, which they need to be together. So I like the deviations. Ellie being imprisoned by the Fireflies, that's new because we never got to see that. We never got to see too much. They mentioned Riley, which was pretty cool. So you're going to see more of that. But Optical, how did you feel about overall the deviations? Because I thought they were pretty effective.
Yeah, I don't have those visceral reactions, that we get sometimes from comic book, not to harp on them, but it was like, oh, it's totally different from the comic books. Like Robert's death is totally different from the game.
Yeah.
The way Tommy was introduced was again different from the game. But as long as the end result, the point B is there, that you don't change it. Like, let's say Sarah didn't die. That's where I do have a problem. How Sarah dies, that's cool with me. Like how you get there. But the meat of, because we know, I guess, sometimes word per word, because even that's one thing, like the moments, as long as you keep the moments. Because when Sarah, remember, Joel left and then Sarah came, the watch, Sarah didn't buy the watch. She had it fixed. but
Right.
they kept the, oh, you get that? I sell drugs, hardcore drugs. And
Yep. I
I
love
was
that. I
I was
love
telling
that.
it to my wife before, and I'm so glad that they kept that. When so that was a deviation because she didn't buy the watch. She went there. She paid for it. I'm totally okay with everything that they did. Robert's death, the way Tommy was introduced, the way Tommy left. Like he went to this radio station and was just like, and they even subtly hint that Tommy, because no one knows Tommy, but both of us, that Tommy was in the Marines or Army. The sticker on his car, like,
Hmm.
hey, he served or whatever. So he's capable, so he can leave on his own. And all those things were the ration cards, and this guy in
Yep.
the radio station was like, Joel cut in the line. It was like, hey man, there's a line, and no one cared, like no one budged. The security guy that he's selling dope with, kind of like, I didn't mind any of those. I think it added more, if not less, because I actually like as I mentioned earlier, I like Robert's death than the game. So
Yeah.
added more dimension. So we're watching something familiar, yet fresh. Like we know the end result sometimes, but we don't know how they're gonna get there, and that keeps me engaged as well. It's kind of be like, oh, they're gonna. No, they didn't chase Robert. Okay,
No. Oh,
just block the
Tess didn't
door.
shoot Robert.
Oh, Ellie's in prison. That
Yeah.
didn't
Right.
happen. But I overall no problems with it. Loved it so far. I don't know how we're gonna react in episode 2, but so far I'm cool with it.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing I would say to Optical is this. The deviation also, this was not something that was ever really in the game. In the show, Joel is looking to go see Tommy anyway, right? So that's something for sure that in the game, that's not really a thing. Joel
Yeah.
is basically just taking Ellie because he has no other choice. He's in a situation where he has to go take Ellie because he cannot go back to Boston.
Yeah.
He cannot go back to the safe zone. There's no way for him to realistically get Ellie back there. So his only way is forward. His only path is forward. And just so happens that he goes through to find Tommy because they're going through that way anyway. In the show, he's deliberately, intentionally looking to go find him to see if he's safe. So in this, he's just kind of taking Ellie as like, okay, I'm going to see Tommy anyway. I might as well just take you, right? So that's kind of what he does to collect the reward and the bounty, and then we'll kind of see the journey along the way. But I like that deviation too, where he's like, he has a motivation not just to take Ellie, but for himself to go. So, and that's why he's doing it. So it's like a double motivation. And over time, it becomes even stronger for what he's trying to do. So there's a lot of things. And, also in the first game, Jackson is like basically a power plant. That's what you see basically. In the second game, it's become like a more city, village, whatever. In the show, you can already see from the trailers, it's like it looks more like the second game. It looks more like a town that's really well put together. So I'm interested to see that deviation as well. I know we're going to see Bill and Frank in the show together. Yeah. So in the game, Frank's just the only time you ever see Frank is when he's hanging. That's it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, but Bill is like really important, and now you're going to get to see both of them. I like that they're kind of humanizing these characters, giving them a little more backstory and background. I think that's great. So, and Ellie being imprisoned by the Fireflies, I kind of like that. Again, it shows the Fireflies, and I think this has been misconstrued over time. The Fireflies are not altruistic. They are not like these good guys here to save the world, whatever. They are not. I'm telling you. Like they might be slightly better than Fedra, but they're not the good guys. Like,
isn't that like Star Wars Rebel?
No, it's not like Luke and Vader, right? Yeah. It's not like that. And I don't think it's kind of like maybe akin to somewhat closer to the Boys, where in the Boys, like Butcher is not really a great dude. Like he's he's probably better than Homelander, but at the end of the day, like he's not really great.
Two evils.
Right. He's the lesser of two because that's kind of maybe what the Fireflies are, which we'll talk about maybe a little bit more. But I like the deviations overall. I felt that overall they made some good ones. The fungus coming out of the lady's mouth, that seemed new. Right, we kind of seem like see stalkers and sort of other early infected zombies in the game in part 2 also. But it's one of those where it's like that was a little bit different. Seeing the lady, that was new. I feel like they made some smart deviations to sort of speed run through certain aspects while also preserving what made the game great. So I think it shows a fundamental understanding because of Neil Druckmann and Craig Mazin together, what makes the game great, what's going to make the show great, and just putting it together. So I thought it was great, man.
Dude, like the dog. Every time you put a dog, my wife was like, "If the dog dies,
the dog.
I'm not gonna watch the show." And like somebody who didn't play the game, when the I don't know, the daughter was like, "Oh, you're gonna bring some cookies," and my wife was like, "This is how it's gonna spread." It was like, "No,
the cookies. It's the cookies.
Cookies not gonna make it spread."
Well, Optical. You know what I was thinking of? It almost was like an Easter egg because the dog. If you remember in the game, they have those wild dogs that show up every now and then.
Yeah.
I think that was almost like sort of a reference to that. I think it was kind of like remember when they're traveling with Henry and Sam and they run across the dogs? They're like, yeah, you don't want to mess with those. Those are wild, right? Yeah, that's basically kind of what I think was going on.
And like I said, I was so fresh at this. What's the dog's name? Mercy or something? In the
Yeah,
first
something like that.
game, so Sarah was walking around, right? And she hears the dog. It's like, is that Mercy? And then you hear so
Yeah,
Mercy
right.
died. And but here they let Mercy live. So I'm glad with that.
Right.
So.
The dog gets killed in the game pretty quickly. Yeah. So yeah,
brutal.
Yeah, exactly. So Optical, we got a couple more questions here before we wrap up this first episode. But I want to ask you, Optical, is this show going to appeal to the masses? Because I've been trying to I can't find any data so far that indicates what the ratings of the episode are. However, I think there's been a lot of positive buzz about it. So I do think this is going to catch on pretty quickly. I personally think that HBO's got their next big hit on their hands. I think that this is going to be the next. If it's not Game of Thrones hype level, I think it might be pretty damn close. I think this is going to be another Game of Thrones level hit for HBO. I think they're going to make something very, very popular here. So I'm starting to wonder, Optical, is this going to appeal to the masses? I say yes. And I think people are going to be able to separate it from Walking Dead because they're two very different things. So what do you think, Optical? Do you think the show is going to appeal to the masses? I think it has so far.
And this is not me being biased here. I think this is going to be bigger than Game of Thrones, and here's why.
Wow. Okay.
With Game of Thrones back then, the only audience you have is the people who read the books. How many people does not read books, right? Like we love Game of Thrones, never read the book. I was introduced to the show. It's like, how many lazy people are like myself, right? A lot. And what does lazy people do? Play video games. When you put The Last of Us, there's already a mass. They already have an audience. Those who play the video games, I'm pretty sure those are excited people to watch The Last of Us. So how many millions of people who play the video games, who's going to watch The Last of Us right off the bat compared to the Game of Thrones, who I have to be introduced as, right? And Game of Thrones, let's be honest, like the Game of Thrones has a good first episode, second decent, and then the rest kind of, it's like, yeah, you wait for 9 and 10. This, we know what to expect. This is like we said, we already know the end result of The Last of Us, the best game ever. So you already have a built-in audience right off the bat. So this is a made franchise that HBO doesn't need to make. It has a following. It sells merch, it sells video games, it has multiple awards. So in that terms, if we're talking about viewership, I think it has a massive advantage over Game of Thrones right off the bat. And I'm not minimizing Game of Thrones because I love that show as well. I love it till the end. A lot of people didn't like that, but I'm just saying right off the bat, this has a built-in audience. So in terms of ratings, I'm pretty sure this was better than the first episode of Game of Thrones.
Right. And think about this, Optical, too, because I'm not really familiar necessarily with the data as far as the books go, as far as Game of Thrones. I know it was a very popular series, obviously, before it was made into an HBO show, because if it weren't, they wouldn't have made it into a show. They wouldn't have adapted it. However, I think because of the show, it boosted it a lot, right? At the end of the day, The Last of Us is probably at least on that level in terms of popularity, a different medium, gaming versus novel, right? But at the end of the day, I do think Last of Us has a very, very significant following prior to the release of the HBO show. So I think this is going to be a very popular hit for HBO. I think it has all the elements that people are going to want to see. A very thought-provoking story. It's got action. It's got originality. It's got great atmosphere. It's got a lot of money baked into each episode. So it's got great visuals, great characters, great music. It's got everything to keep you engaged and entertained for a 9-episode series, because they're going to cover the whole first game from this show, from the first season. So they're going to cover a lot of territory. So where they go in the second season, I think, is going to be the question. Because are they going to go part 2? Or are they going to maybe expand upon what the game has done and keep the characters, right? Because I'm thinking, unfortunately, to my opinion, some people are obviously going to disagree with this, and that's totally fine. I think they are going to do part 2 eventually. And I'm actually fine with that, because I feel like if maybe they approach it a little bit differently, I'd probably like it. I think if they approach maybe constructing the story a little bit differently, I think I might end up enjoying it. But I think at the end of the day, the first Last of Us, I think you could stretch out maybe 2 seasons out of it. Maybe like make the first game one whole season and then find a way to make a second season based on something. Maybe you make it a prequel with Joel and Tommy. I've heard that's a possibility for Last of Us 3. Maybe they'll do that instead of doing more story with Abby and Ellie. Maybe they'll go back, Joel and Tommy Hunter years. Maybe they'll do something like that. I think that would be an excellent DLC, worst case. But I think at the end of the day, I think this is really something that I think is going to be a massive hit. And will it be bigger than Game of Thrones? That's a tough bar to cross. But I don't know, Optical. You might be right. But I don't know if Game of Thrones had so many characters and dragons and crazy shit, you know?
And that might be the advantage of Last of Us, because
Right.
you're focused. Unlike Walking Dead, that you love this guy, you love this guy. This one you're gonna love two people, and
Right.
then you're gonna meet characters along the way that you're gonna be like, it's gonna touch you. But
And then they'll be gone.
and then
Yep.
they'll be gone, right? But I, I I don't know, man. Like if you look at the number of sales, and these guys have to buy the game at that time at $60. If you look at how many sales they made, I'm pretty sure it's millions.
Yeah.
And even if you tell me only half of those guys watches the show, because let's say they moved on, we're still talking about 10 and at least millions of people who's gonna watch the show right off the bat. Because honestly, I didn't watch Game of Thrones in game one. I think I picked it up season 3 or something, because at that time it was the height of zombies. It was like, yeah, okay, dragons and whatnot. So, but I picked it up. I loved it. I ended up loving it. I think this guy, I don't know. I could be wrong here. It's not a competition anyway, but I just want this to be loved for people who still hasn't seen it, experience it the way we did. And just by sheer numbers itself, from the people who bought the game, not just this game, but the Last of Us 2 games,
Yep.
I think they're gonna play it. I think not play. I think they're gonna watch it. And by that, I hope it becomes popular, because for us, that means they pick up the second season or third season, or maybe expedite the game. So, but I think it'll be a massive hit. Would it be bigger than Game of Thrones? I don't think it needs to be, but I think it will.
Yeah. I think it very well could be. I guess we're going to find out. And, I'm going to predict not quite as big as Game of Thrones, but pretty close. That's what I'm going to say. But we're going to find out. Optical. What do we expect to see in episode 2? Because episode 2, honestly, they didn't show a teaser yet from last night's episode as far as us recording this podcast episode. So we did not see anything besides sort of a behind the scenes look. That's all we saw. But I think my best speculation, I don't know if they released the title of this. I'll have to look this up. But I think what's going to happen, we're going to see Bill this episode. I think we're going to see Bill. And I'm starting to wonder if maybe Tess is even going to be there this time. Tess is going to be included in the Bill situation. And then we're going to get more stuff with Tess a little bit later. Tess might be, only around a couple more episodes. But I think maybe one. But I think this episode might be a Bill and Frank type episode where we get to meet them, travel with Joel and Ellie and Tess. I think it's going to pick up a little bit. I think Tess might actually be there this time, Optical. What do you think?
I think this is spoiler alert. I think this is the last episode of Test.
Yeah.
The way the show is progressing, and again, like I said, it was a lot faster than I thought it would be, because I was just like, how are they going to drag this on? And I want them to drag this on, but I feel like this is the last. And you could be right; they could deviate that way, and I'm not going to be mad at that. Like putting Bill there, or Bill's crazy. I love to see Bill, because I heard so many positive things. I don't know the actor's name, but they said he killed it.
Oh, Nick Offerman.
Yeah, I would love to see that. Would they meet up with Tess? I wouldn't be mad. But yeah, I think, and selfishly, I don't want them to go too fast, kind of like let's savor the moment here. But yeah, I think you're right. I think we're gonna see them. It stops right there, and then season 3 we'll see if they go. Is it Seattle next?
I think they're supposed to go to Kansas City or something.
Kansas, okay.
Yeah, instead of Pittsburgh, it's like Kansas City or something like that. I'm not
Where
sure.
Where did they meet those guys where you got ambushed?
That's Pittsburgh originally.
That's Pittsburgh. Okay.
Yeah, that's Pittsburgh originally, but I think they changed it to Kansas City, as far as I'm aware.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, but I mean, it's still the same scenes, I would assume. It's just, and they meet Henry and Sam, but I think it's going to be Kansas City instead of Pittsburgh. I think that's what's going to happen. But I don't know. That's where the Chiefs are. So
I just I again, because the biggest, I would say, we crown this as the best game ever. There's so many factors to crowning something the best game ever, and one of them, in my opinion, is the journey. So I wish the journey here, if just watching, they would experience the same journey as what we had playing the game, because that's hard to do, because how many times we died trying to escape that bloater. They wouldn't experience that. But if they felt the journey, at least my wife, or who hasn't watched it, that's a win for me.
Right. I absolutely agree, man. I think it's one of those situations where it's really going to get people pretty excited on what's to come. The first episode is just the appetizer. It's the teaser. And then you move into the rest of the show, which I think is going to be pretty remarkable. But I think the segment with Bill in the game actually is one of the better parts of the game, I feel like. That's actually pretty fun. When you're going through the school, you fight the bloater. There's a lot of cool stuff there. I'm wondering if we're going to see a bloater, maybe a couple more episodes in. I'm not sure we see one in episode 2. I think we are going to see clickers, though, in episode 2. So I think this is going to be our first taste of clickers. And Optical, I know, just on a brief little side tangent, for those that collect merchandise, Optical and I are big collectors. We collect a lot of Last of Us stuff. I'm really hoping someone gets this license to make high quality figures, statues, whatever, because I think this could be pretty exciting. So I'm really excited to see the Optical episode 2. I think we're going to get a continuation of Ellie and Joel's sort of connection and journey together. We're going to see a little more Tess. We're going to travel through the Boston area, try to get to Bill, to get a battery, to get a car, to travel. That's where we're going. We need Bill to get the car, the battery, and the car to travel to previously Pittsburgh, but now Kansas City. So I think we're going to see that in episode 2. We're going to see some Bill and Frank stuff. And yeah, they're going to expand on that. But Optical, do you have any like final thoughts about episode 2 or anything else?
I want to see Spores first. 1 and 2.
Dude, they're not in the show apparently.
They're not.
Yeah, supposedly they said Spores. I think I read that Spores are not going to be in the show. Yeah.
Oh, come on. That's one of the biggest Ellie surprise because she doesn't have to wear the mask.
Yeah, so there's no Spores. Yeah.
I get it because they don't want to cover Pedro's
I think that's why they don't want them wearing masks all the time. Yeah.
Right. Like, but even on the game, you only wear it like, you cross
every now and then.
Yeah. But I wish because it kind of enhances Ellie's, quote unquote abilities. And like, hey, she can walk through this without a mask. And now she can, went to the next puzzle without one. So, but yeah, I mean, that's it. I'm excited for episode 2, man. Like, I can't wait for Sunday. Now I got to look forward to Sunday because there's no Bears anymore.
Nope.
At least my Sundays are at least filled and I'm excited, man. I just can't wait.
Yeah, me too, man. I'm really excited. But guys, thank you so much for listening to episode 1 of our podcast. Like I said, there will be more episodes to come. And of course, we got a young Last of Us fan on the screen here if you're watching on YouTube. So it's going to be a good progression to get the youth into this show. But guys, yeah, check out this channel for, like I said, for more Last of Us updates on news, merchandise, episode reviews, everything in between gaming playthroughs we're going to do on this channel. So we're going to cover everything The Last of Us gaming and otherwise HBO show. That said, thank you so much to my first guest, Mr. Optical 20. Thank you, bro. I appreciate your insights. And of course, getting to connect with a fellow Last of Us fan about something really, really goddamn exciting in this IP. So yeah, man, thanks for joining. Guys, we'll catch you in the next one. There'll be one of these a week, maybe some more in between. So stay on the lookout for more content. Thank you so much. Peace out. See ya.